Welcome to part 11 of my tutorial series on modeling a clock in Maya. In this tutorial we're going to be texturing the battery and using a sort of advanced UV mapping tool to achieve that. Now the first thing I want to do is hide the image planes. They're in the way of accessing the battery. Now uncheck visibility on the images. Close channel/layers box. So, one thing I want to do before we get started on the battery is assign this case with the same blend material which is assigned to the clock. So I'm going to go to Window, Rendering Editors, Hypershade. This is the exact same process we used on the hands. Then right click on Blend 1 and click Assign Material to Selected. And we can close the hypershade now. So, onto the battery. Now for texturing the battery, we're going to UV map it in a slightly more complex way than we UV mapped the faceplate for our clock. Now UV mapping the battery, I would compare it at least in some terms to how if you've ever seen how they make globes, like paper globes, and how they cut the edges, well, we're going to do the same thing so we can unfold the UVs. And ironically, the tool you use to do that is unfold. So to get started, we're going to cylinder map our battery. So we're going to go to the polygons menu set, then go to Create UVs, Cylinder mapping. The next thing I want to do is open the attributes editor and rotate it 90 degrees on the Z axis. Now that that's done, we can close the attributes editor, go back to our normal select tool, go back to object mode, and also we want to open up the UV editor by going to Window, UV editor. So here's what our UVs look like right now. Right now, the faces on the end of our battery are pretty poorly represented, as they're almost completely flat and you can barely see them. We are going to fix that by using that technique I mentioned earlier. So I'm going to go to Edge Mode, and I'm going to select all the edges on the ends of the battery, both ends. Simply go to the side view and make a square and select all the edges. So the next thing I'm going to do is edit UVs, cut UV edges. So right now Maya's just cut the UVs for all of these edges, so they're disconnected. And last but not least, we're going to unwrap them, and this is when you'll start noticing the comparison to the sphere, or the globe I was talking about. Now to unwrap the UVs, I'm going to start off by converting my selection to UVs. Right now I have edges selected, so I'm going to go to Select, Convert Selection to UVs. That was pretty simple. The next thing I'm going to do is go to Select, Grow Region, and I'll continue doing this until our UVs are one ring away from the UVs that define the rest of the battery. Now I'm going to go to Edit UVs, Unfold. I will make sure pinning is checked, and it's set to pin unselected UVs. That means it will leave the UVs, like I said, going along the battery intact, and unfold constraint none, and leave the rest of the options at the default. Just click apply and close. So here's that cutting effect I was talking to you about. So the last thing I want to do, go to Object Mode, then go to Edit UVs, Layout. Now the layout tool will basically put these UVs in our usable UV range, which is that dark gray square. Anything beyond the dark gray square won't be textured. So I'll set the layout to overlapping, separate shells off. These settings really don't apply to us, but this one does. We want to put them into a square. Scale mode must be set to uniform, otherwise it will mess it all up. Rotate, none, shell stacking, once again really not important. And click out layout UVs. So the next thing I'm going to do is create our texture in Adobe Photoshop. So I will select our battery, and on the rendering shelf, I just closed the UV texture editor, and on the rendering shelf, create a new blend material. It's automatically assigned to the battery, and I'm going to set the color to black. So that's the base of our battery texture. Now off to Photoshop by going to the rendering shelf, then go to render, texturing, create PSD network. This will allow us to contact Adobe Photoshop and have it create a texture for us. Then we'll give it a name. Set the size to 512 by 512. Color value, I have it set to red, though I believe it defaults at white. And the attribute we want to texture is color. So when you have all these options filled out, make sure Open Adobe Photoshop is checked, then click Create. So now Adobe Photoshop has just loaded our file, and we can begin editing it. So here's a look at what it should look like finished. Now to start off, we're going to create the orange strip along the top. So I'll use the rectangle marquee tool. Go to layer 1. Now you should notice layer 1's inside a group because Maya will only use the pixels inside blend5.color group. The reason for that is so that Maya could, for example, have multiple groups and have multiple textures in Maya linked to that group. We could have one group for a bump map, one group for specular. In this case, we only have one group because we're only texturing color. And the other advantage of groups is we can have the UVs, a picture of them, so we can go walk with them, but they won't actually appear on our texture. That way we won't have any red lines showing up. So, back to our rectangle marquee tool, and I'm basically going to mask off about the size of the orange portion of the battery. Now I'm just going to go to the brush tool, grab an orange color. I'm using pure yellow orange, and begin painting. The mask will prevent you from painting outside of your designated area, and then just deselect the mask by going to Select, Deselect, or hitting Ctrl D on your keyboard as I just did. Now the next thing we want to do is add the gray area on the tips of the battery. So I'm going to once again use the marquee tool and basically marquee select all the pixels and halfway up the bevel of the end of our battery. Go back to the brush tool, grab a gray, and color it in. Then just repeat on the opposite side. Now we're going to add some text on the battery. We will want the text to be white. The font I'm using is Arial. Its size is 39 pixels. I will call these batteries max batteries. Now I'm going to just default tool, and now actually I want to go to the move tool, move it across a bit. Then I'm going to go to edit, transform, rotate, and then on this field enter -90. that I rotate it -90 degrees so it's facing the right direction on our battery. Go back to the Move tool. Yes, I want to apply the transformation. And slide it up to right about there. We want it centered on the black. Now our texture is basically complete. All that's left is going to File, Save, and then, back in Maya, select your battery, make sure Hardware Texturing is on, then go to Texturing, Update PSD Networks. Now you can see our battery's texture appear on our model. I'm going to rotate the battery a bit, just so it shows off the text a little nicer. And that concludes this part of my clock modeling tutorial series.